Good afternoon, everybody. I've got a few things I'm going to go through today, but I'm going to start off with a briefing and an update on the nitrate salts, basically at WIPP, at Waste Control Specialist, and at Los Alamos, and give you an update on that. Before I start that, I've got a couple things. Where we left off with an introduction, I'd like to start with an introduction. Kiki Torres, who is in the audience today, I drug him up here. He is my new deputy. Kiki will be in charge of the recovery on the nitrate salt processing at Los Alamos. So some of the corrections, the work we need to do to get back to an operational state and then get prepared for shipment of that waste and other waste that we still have in the 3706 campaign. Kiki's really going to lead the charge for me on that. He comes with a lot of transuranic waste experience, detailed experience in working the requirements of WIPP, as well as the operational aspects of a facility processing transuranic waste. So I'm happy to have him here, so he'll probably be showing up more at these types of meetings, maybe giving some of the more technical, detailed briefings on the recovery actions as we go forward. The second thing I'd like to do is really, Morgan was here today from the state, but I'd like to recognize the relationship that we have with the State of New Mexico Environmental Department. Since this issue with the nitrate salt started, we've had either daily communications or now twice a week communications going through all different aspects of the problems with the State of New Mexico. We've also submitted volumes and volumes and volumes of information, processing records, data on the waste, everything like that that they've requested back and forth. So it's a lot of work on both parties. And it was nice having Morgan here today, where the secretary was not able to make it. But it's been a good, open relationship and the information going back and forth on that. The briefing I'm going to give today is exactly the same briefing that was given to the committee, the Legislative Committee on Hazardous and Radioactive Materials just over a week ago. And so I wanted to go back through that. We'd got permission to use this briefing, and when this was presented, it created a little bit of controversy, so I'm probably going to talk about some of the things that were either misquoted or misunderstood, and then with any questions, clarify any questions I don't cover. So what I'm going to cover is really our understanding today of what may have happened and where we are in the technical investigation. Discussing the safety of the transuranic waste, the controls that we've put on it at Los Alamos, at Waste Control Specialists, and at basically the waste in Panel 7. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in remediation. So what we really want to do on this is move forward where we do have some unknowns in the waste and something that probably shouldn't have been put together. How do we remediate that and get that back to an insured safe condition? And then, so that will be kind of the inerting. This is a timeline. It's a little harder to see on the screen, or maybe my glasses are just getting old. But there's a few things I'd like to talk about. So we try to keep a timeline representative of all the work that's going on here, and just a few things probably since we talked last time. We did apply what's called a D001 code under RCRA. That's the code that's applied for the characteristic of ignitability. So that was applied because of the evidence of the breach in WIPP, that there could have been ignitability in that waste, where we have the nitrate with the organic kitty litter. That was certainly a possibility. So in August, as a conservative measure, in discussions with WIPP, and really working hand in hand with DOE headquarters, decided to apply that code to the waste. There was a technical assessment report that was done, a briefing that was done to DOE headquarters late July, early August. And then the some of the work that's been done in the last month has really been focused on remediation. And what do we do with this waste? How do we get it back into a safe condition first, but then into a waste form that would be acceptable to WIPP? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but we've got a meeting next Monday with the State of New Mexico Environmental Department where we're going to brief out to them in more detail where we're looking at going forward. We are under administrative order with the State of New Mexico, and so anything we really do in this area, we need to have their permission and their approval before we go do it. So again, you can see the importance of what I started the discussion with of clear and transparent communication. So this is just a little bit of history on drum 68660. That's the drum that's breached in WIPP. The picture down in the bottom right-hand corner shows what that drum looks like today. The waste was really generated at LANL. This drum was generated in 1985, and basically, once processed, went into storage for the next 30, just about 30 years until it entered the processing under the 3706 campaign. This waste was identified as a waste stream for disposition within the 3706 campaign. So then basically it was taken out of storage. The characterization process began in December of 2013. December 4th, the drum was remediated in our Wicker facility. So the parent drum was opened up. The processing of the waste, mixing it with the absorbent was performed. It was packaged into a new daughter drum. That daughter drum received the number 68660, and just short of 2 months later, that container was placed into panel 7, room 7. And then on Valentine's Day of February 14th, the drum, that's when we got WIPP got the radiation alarms, and that's the likely date that container breached, that we have evidence on. WIPP has evidence on the filters that you can see, you can evidence contamination, you can see particulates and things like that. So that's kind of the timeline. And what that really said is pretty quick, pretty quick. So once the drum was processed in December, whatever happened that we don't completely yet understand, it happened fairly quickly to result in that breach. Since this problem, I think we saw the drum on the 15th of May of this year with the breach, we went to work really looking at this nitrate salt mixture that we had processed with the organic kitty litter. So you had a fuel and an oxidizer together, and we started conducting different experiments around ignitability, around reactivity, to see if we could get a reaction. And as this started, I thought it would be fairly simple, and I thought it'd be fairly quick, because of that quick time frame that we saw in this reaction. That we'd be able to figure this out. Well, we've had a team of scientists at the laboratory of 50 to 100 people out of the chemistry division that have been working really the last 4 months to try to understand, and we still haven't. We figured out some things about the mixture, but we have not come up with what may have initiated it. So kind of where we are is if you get up to about 100 degrees C or in that range, we can hypothesize a set of reactions that could have occurred that would have got this thing going, basically. But we don't know at this time what could have happened to get the temperature up to 100 degrees C. So there's still some additional testing that's being done at the laboratory. We're working with the DOE technical assistance team so that's a whole bunch of really smart people from chemical facilities across the DOE complex that have come together to put their thoughts, advice on what we should be doing to investigate that. So they come up with additional experiments or tests. LANL or a different laboratory will carry those out. So we're not my message is we're not done looking at this yet. We're still looking for that, that initiator that could have started this reaction if in fact, this drum was the one that basically started the event. So we're still very much involved with that work. So there's a couple things. Certainly with the recipe that should have been looked at. Not as many concerns about if we'd used an inorganic material to inert this as opposed to what we did with the organic. But we looked at, at Los Alamos, we've been working on a causal review that really has dug down into all the processing. Legal has also been looking at the regulatory aspects of what's been going on. And we've come up with a couple things, really that shows that we could have better understood this waste as we'd started processing it or at the point of generation. So as this waste was generated at TA55 in 1985, the salts were basically evaporated out of the evaporator bottoms, and then those salts were dried, or the liquids were sucked off, and they were packaged into bags, and then those bags were packaged into the parent containers that were then put into storage. And over time, and we're not, liquid started coming out of that waste, and that was a bit unexpected, and that created, as they started processing, we were doing absorption of those liquids, but in testing of those liquids, they had seen some low pHs, and they'd started some neutralization, or that was put into the procedure to neutralize that. Well, that was done outside the bounds of what our RCRA permit that allowed, and we self-disclosed that issue to the state as soon as we found out about it. The same thing on acceptable knowledge. So if I go back to the neutralization, what we were doing there is we had a corrosive waste defined under RCRA. We should have at that time updated our acceptable knowledge on that waste stream. That certainly would have highlighted the need to enter into the permit. But that was not done, so that was also disclosed to the state, and those are a couple of the non-compliances that we've disclosed to date. And we're still looking at other things that may have happened with this waste at Los Alamos. So that may not be the end of our discussions with the state in that area. So as I've talked before here about the inventory, this is the most interesting part of the presentation, and this is where some of the confusion resulted from the meeting last week, and I'm going to try to go through this in more detail. One of the things that a responsible generator or department would do if we have a problem is we'd go do a review and look for if we have any similar waste that may create the same type of problem. So an analysis was done looking at that. So this kind of narrows down. We had a starting population of 707 containers. 29 of those were not remediated with the kitty litter yet, so they're in storage at Los Alamos. That brings you down to 678. So that's really the starting population. 453 of those are in panel 6 at WIPP. 55 of those are in panel 7 at WIPP. 113 of those are at waste control specialists, and 57 of those are in controlled storage at Los Alamos National Laboratory. If I start to narrow down, looking at the 68660 container and what characteristics it had things like it had a low starting pH in the parent container of the free liquids. It was treated with the S-Sweet kitty litter. It had color safe added as the neutralizer. It had a glove box, a shielded glove that operators basically put their hands into the glove box to manipulate the waste. Those gloves have to be changed out occasionally. those gloves go into the waste stream. So the 68660 had a glove in it. And so we go down from the 16 with the low pH, 8 of those that had the absorbed free liquid with the organic, with the same type of neutralizer, and we eventually get to 2 containers. So I've got one container is the one breached at WIPP. The other one has similar characteristics. So let's talk about those for just a minute. The breached container at WIPP 68660 had a pH of 0. So if you understand pH, once you get to 0, it just stays 0. So you may get more and more and more concentrated of an acid or higher molarity, but your pH doesn't change. You don't see anything less than 0. The pH of this other container, 68499, had a pH of 1. To me, that's a huge difference because it was a recorded pH. So it wasn't some unknown at 0 or less than 0. There's a big difference between 0 and 1. So that's a good thing, and that's a significant difference. The container at WIPP had 2 gallons of liquid that was within the parent container. The one that 68499 had 6 gallons, so that's a difference. If I look at the wastes have lots of different concentrations of nitrate salts, different metal cations. We also had what's called oxalate salts, which were formation out of oxalic acid. They don't have the same properties as nitrates basically at all. So if I look at what we believe the oxalate-bearing salts were proportionally 36% in the 660 versus 47% in this other container. So again, that's another piece that's probably to the better side if you're doing a direct comparison. The percent full, 660 container was about 60% full. The 499 container was about 100% full. And then let me say, these came from, so there were some reports that these were from the same parent container. They were not from the same parent container. One was produced from a different parent container. The 660 was produced in 1985. The 499 container was produced in 1984. So they're not only not siblings, they're not in the same graduating class even. So that's kind of a way to think about it. In terms of a risk of an imminent reaction, we don't. It's kind of like I said on the chemistry so far. I don't understand what caused an initiator in the waste, so I can't. People want to guarantee. Is this not going to react? Until we completely understand that reaction pathway, it's hard to answer that as a complete guarantee. We believe there's a very low risk of what we know today of the chemical makeup and some of the differences in this container. Very low risk of this having an issue or evidencing an issue at WIPP. See if I've got anything else on that. I think that's it. The other thing that we do, and we're doing with WIPP, is anything we learn in our chemistry investigations, anything that may be a new hazard, we're communicating directly with WIPP on that. So we've got a twice-a-week call that we do with the WIPP facility that I sit in and my folks sit in. And on that, we update any new details on the chemistry. So if we see a new hazard or something like that, we'll be talking to WIPP about that. So that's important, as we talked earlier. As they've got people down in the facility doing work, they always want to know if they're doing everything they can to keep those people safe. And so that's one of the things we do from the work up here and the work that other laboratories are doing in the investigation. Remediation of the waste. So this is our kind of moving forward from the point we are today and looking at what different processes may be available. There's a couple things. So we've got 4 options on the table. The first one is to kind of go back and do what we should have done the first time, and that was to add inert material to the waste in a concentration sufficient that ensures there's no chance of ignitability or reactivity of the waste. That's based upon testing, so that's certainly a valid option. Option 2 is similar to that, but once you get it made safe, or you put the inert material in, you also add a cementing agent, mix it up, and basically make a concrete out of it. The third option is a dry process where you wouldn't add the zeolite and go through that step. To start with, you just take the raw waste, add water, and add a cement compound and make cement with it. And the last one is is that you'd add water to start with, which some believe would make the waste kind of inherently safe, and then cement again without the zeolite addition. At this time, and what we're really talking to the state with, and this is a very detailed chemistry type of question that we've involved our chemistry folks with, but we're focusing on option 1. We believe that we may see some issues, and there's some more tests to be done on this, but once you add water and go to cementing with the organic material in there, we're a little bit worried about what effect any biologicals would have on the setting of the cement and things like that. We think if we come up with a robust recipe for inerting the material with zeolite, which is an inorganic material, to the point it can't have a reaction. If we take, basically in mixing this up, if we take what I call a Frankenstein surrogate, so it's the worst that we can think of to make up. We prove that to make safe. We do testing. We validate that testing through an independent laboratory, not Los Alamos. That's a good route to go. So that's one of the discussions we're having with the state. But again, we're not doing anything without the authorization of the environmental department. So that's where we are on that. And then this is just kind of a path forward. I want to talk, we've got safe storage controls in place at Los Alamos that I've talked about before. Excuse me, with the waste in the permacons. We haven't seen any reactions. We do daily or hourly inspections, 24 hours a day on that waste. Since the waste was placed into there, we haven't seen any signs of fire, of smoke, of temperature increases. One of the things we do is shoot it daily with a thermography gun to look at the temperature of all the containers and things like that. Also, the investigation is ongoing. We talked about that. Morgan talked about the Accident Investigation Board. My understanding is that report may now be available in November sometime. So I think they're waiting to finish up the visual inspection in Panel 7 before they finalize that report. I think that's an important piece of information that we'll have. LANL corrective actions, I talked about the causal review, and Kiki Torre is really leading that, but we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we can do this work safely, new procedures, processes, and controls to put in place. And lastly, once we get through that, once we get our remediation approach tested and approved, to move forward on processing the nitrate salt waste. One other thing, if I go back to remediation, I forgot to mention, one thing the chemists have come up with is it'd be a good idea to start with this waste in processing of the waste in a cold condition. And so even down to freezing, if we've got some headspace gas that suggests that we may have some biological activity in there, to basically go in and freeze the waste. Even if that's not the case, reactions that are much less likely to happen, we've talked about before, likely to happen at lower temperatures. And so one of the things we're doing at the laboratory is we're bringing in some freezer equipment that we can put standard waste boxes, or we can put drums into, basically get that drum into a very cold, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and then start processing it at that temperature. We think that improves the worker safety on it. So that's one of the things the chemists have recommended that we're likely to move forward. Again, that'll be discussed with the state of New Mexico. And I think that's all I've got.